everyone, and welcome to the Osborne Group chat. My name is Laurel McCombs. I'm Senior Philanthropy Advisor with the Osborne Group, and I'm super excited today to be joined by my colleague, Robert Osborne. Hello, Bob.
Hello, Laurel.
So as some of you know, we record these chats occasionally, not as often as we like. We continue to promise to work on that. But we thought we'd come together today because there's a topic that has been on my mind. A lot of my clients actually know that this is kind of my topic of the year. This is my 2023 rant that has been sitting in my brain all year. I've started to actually do some webinars on this. I did some in-person training on this year, but Bob and I haven't really talked about it. I don't even know if he's aware of kind of how persistent this has become in my brain. So I wanted to come here today, Bob, and pose some philosophical fundraising questions to you about stewardship, and particularly about gratitude and acknowledgement. I feel like for a really, really long time, when we say the words stewardship, even though we talk about how stewardship is providing joy and demonstrating impact, the thing that we seem to get back from a lot of organizations are fairly generic thank you letters that just kind of say, we're so grateful for your generosity. And I'm not sure if that's the most effective stewardship that we can be doing. So that's what I wanted to chat with you about today. So Bob, I know you have a lot of experience, obviously, with stewardship, and so I'll kind of stop talking and first and foremost just pose to you, what have you been seeing in stewardship lately, and kind of what are your thoughts about the state of stewardship in the sector?
Well, I think sadly, it's about the state that it's been for as long as I think both you and I can remember, which is, you and I both talk a lot about whatever you're doing in stewardship, you're probably not doing enough. And I think, unfortunately, that remains true. And I think, in the world we live in today, where there's such deep distrust for institutions, I think it's just more important than ever, right? Like that we keep our donors informed and really focus on impact. But I agree with you that most people, when they hear the word stewardship, are not really thinking about impact. They're thinking about staying in touch in some way, right? Like sending a newsletter or saying thank you. It's almost sometimes can be like a reward, like you get stewarded by giving more, and like somehow you deserve less stewardship if you're giving less. Like it's like there's like a deservingness in there somewhere. So yeah, unfortunately, I would say it hasn't radically changed. I mean, I think hopefully with our clients that they're all embracing this a little bit more, but yeah, I think it's unfortunately a lot of what it's always been. So, but I'm curious about your rant. Are you going to go on a rant during the podcast, or you're going to ask me questions and then maybe you'll rant at the end? I'm looking forward.
You want a rant? Here's my rant. And forgive me, everyone, if I'm a little hyperbolic, but I feel like it's time for a little hyperbole in this, because let's look at the statistics, right? 2022, one of the worst years on record in terms of philanthropic giving, one of the first year since the Great Recession that both the number of donors and the number of dollars went down. According to the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, donor retention across the sector is to an all-time low of 42.6%. 5 to 6 percentage points lower than it's sat pathetically at like 47 to 48% over the last 20 years. So I'm not telling anybody anything they don't know or anything revolutionary, that we have a problem in the philanthropic sector. And I think there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of blog posts and a lot of articles written about what the problem is and how do we address the problem. And I think at some point, we've got to look at ourselves and say, we're kind of the problem, right? And I look at the number of times I open up my email and I have blog posts and articles, emails from different consultants and different vendors. I read the Chronicle of Philanthropy almost every day. I'm looking at the Nonprofit Times. I'm kind of up on stuff. And the number of times that I continue to see people just talking about how do we get more out of donor generosity? How do we build more generosity? And I think if this was really about generosity, there wouldn't be anything we could do, right? Because people would just say, I'm giving. If people were purely giving because they were generous, they just pick the first 5 nonprofits that they drove past every day and throw money out the window to them, right? If this was just about being generous, it would just be about whatever organization, told me the nicest things, right? But I think what we know is this isn't about generosity. People give to nonprofits, and I would make the argument that especially as we move beyond the Eisenhower generation and the Boomer generation and start getting trying to engage more and more donors in Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z, this becomes even more so. They're giving because they want to see a change in the world. They want to have impact, right? Because if it's just about generosity, then it wouldn't matter who I gave to. And it wouldn't matter if I gave to you or you or you. I was just being generous, right? But yes, generosity is, and I'm being hyperbolic. Yes, generosity is important. And yes, people could just keep their money and not give anything to philanthropy at all. So there is an element of generosity. But when people are choosing which nonprofits they're investing in, it becomes about what impact can I have on my community, on the things that matter to me? When we look at the number of donors declining who are giving to the nonprofit sector, I would also make the argument that good causes and worthy causes outside of the 501c3 sector are doing a better job of demonstrating the impact that somebody's money can have, right? So again, if generosity is kind of the thing that's saying, here's my philanthropic portfolio, here's how much money I'm willing to give away, it's impact that's determining to me where I'm going to give it. And maybe we in the 501c3 sector are not doing such a good job of demonstrating that impact, so people are giving it to other places, right? And so I would argue that people aren't giving less money away. I mean, yes, economic factors are what they are, but as a percentage of their wealth, or a percentage of whatever that they're just not giving it to us, right? And maybe that's our fault.
I like it. I think a good rant. And we're recording this without me having had the benefit of hearing the rant before. So but I do think it's an interesting framing, and it does get me thinking a little bit about, right, like how we as a sector frame our work in terms of generosity, as opposed to impact, as opposed to a movement building act, as opposed to an act of making change, as opposed to an obligation on some level that we have to making the world a little bit of a better place. And I think that language may have, to your point, have a bigger effect than maybe we think, in terms of how we write stewardship letters, or how we think about our stewardship programs. You and I have been talking for a long time, and Karen before us, about how important it is to report on impact, that saying thank you is nice, and it's important to acknowledge donors, and it's it's important to do it as quickly as you can, and it's all of those things are important, but that ultimately where you gain from stewardship, as opposed to just sort of tread water with stewardship, is that impact reporting. But I also think you're right, there's maybe implications beyond that, to your point, that that as a sector, right, are people less generous, or are we giving them less reason to give? And I think that's a very interesting question that you've posed, and I think you're probably right. And so I was talking to some other consultants that we know, friend of the firm, Jennifer Fila, and she was posing the question, like, what do we know that maybe people are just giving to their families, and and giving by other means. It's just this institutionalized philanthropy that's maybe suffering, and that maybe we are conflating being a C3 as the only route for giving. And I think you and I are both people of color, and I think so we're both pretty familiar with the idea that people of color very often give in very different ways that are much less formal, that are not part of part of formal organizations, more likely to be family or within their own communities in a direct sort of way. So that kind of runs true with me. And I had promised her, I'm like, I'm going to look into this. So it's interesting as you had this thought, because I was having this thought too, but from a different, because that report and Giving USA just hit me wrong too. I'm like, this just feels like, is this really a trend? It's one data point, right? It's 1 year. So that makes me ask some questions. And then two, is it true? Or is it just, we're just not we're not capturing all of philanthropy?
Well, and the trend that is not a 1 year trend is the decline in the number of donors. And I think there's a bigger question, and maybe a topic for another chat, is we do things in philanthropy very specifically because it's what the Eisenhower generation and the Boomer generation really, really liked. And they have been around for so long, and they have been our target audience for so long, that most of our best practices and most of our, kind of things that we hold to be true about fundraising are built around them, are built around what they are built around what they're used to, are built around their generation's concept of generosity. You think about the Eisenhower generation particularly being kind of the United Way generation, where it was more about generosity, where it was more about like, yeah, I'm just supposed to give to my community, so I'm going to give to the United Way and they'll figure out who to give it to, right? Nobody gives like that anymore, except for that generation still, And so and you look at the ways we raise money, and again, maybe a topic for another day, but direct marketing, direct mail, right? Like, what happens now? Because Gen X doesn't want it, millennials don't want it, Gen Z doesn't want it. Now what, right? And I think this applies very much to stewardship, which is, how is engagement the key driver of giving? Not solicitation, right? And so, in a world where we can't rely on generosity to be the core reason people are funneling money to the nonprofit sector, how are we first and foremost engaging people in our work and trusting that engagement will drive giving, not trusting that solicitation drives giving? And that's where I think too, what I'm seeing with stewardship with so many organizations is it's just one-way communication. It's a thank you note, it's an impact report, it's an annual report, it's a one-way, often beautifully printed piece of communications that arrives in my mailbox or in my inbox, in my email, that I may or may not look at, that may or may not engage me in any particular way.
Yeah, well, I think so. Yeah, I mean, we've been pushing that for a long time, and how important engagement is. But I think you really hit the nail on the head, because I think it has larger sector implications. I think I really like the way you said, what can we count on now that we can't count on generosity? And I think that's a much better question than how can we, increase generosity, or, oh my God, why has the world become, this country become less generous, So I really like that framing, because I think that's actionable, right? As opposed to wringing our hands and lamenting the world falling apart in yet another way. That feels like something that we can be proactive around and really think about. And so I think engagement is a big part of it. So how have you been talking to your clients and other people in the sector about this? I mean, is it mostly about engagement? Are there other things that you've been encouraging people to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two biggest things are things that we've talked about, which is how are you incorporating more two-way actual engagement into all of your development activities, whether that's identity from the moment you identify someone through solicitation, through stewardship, all of it. And how are you doing it at all levels of giving? This is the other reality too, right? Is we can no longer, and there was just, last month's Chronicle of Philanthropy, right? Talking about how the donor pyramid is broken, right? And so much of that is about that maybe we've lost a lot of those smaller dollar donors because we've funneled them into this direct marketing system that is super impersonal, super one way, doesn't engage folks at all. Why would I continue to give if all I ever get from you is one-way communication and solicitations?
Yeah.
How is that meaningful to me? And so, we have to make, and there's been articles in response to that say, well, then I guess we just focus on big donors. And I think, no, that's not how we do this. That's not equity. That's not inclusiveness. Like, everyone should be part of the philanthropic process and the
And wants to be.
Yeah. So let's adjust our strategies in a high efficiency, high return on investment way, right? Still thinking about cost per dollar raised, still thinking about being effective, but how do we start to be more creative, be more thoughtful about two-way meaningful engagement at all levels of giving? I think that's one thing. And again, impact. And I think there's a real conversation that a lot of organizations need to have with themselves about, do we even know what our impact is? Are we even measuring our impact? Is part of the reason we lean on thank you and acknowledgement and recognition of donors and gratitude and generosity, because we're afraid to actually say, we don't know how to measure the impact that we're having, and we can't share it with you. And I think, that's, again, maybe a conversation for another day, but
Yeah.
but at some point we need to know what our theory of change is. We need to know how we're enacting that theory of change, and then be able to tell the world, this is what's changing because we exist. And if you can't do that, figure it out, because it's not going to be somebody else's fault that you lost donors because you couldn't tell them the difference that you were making.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think the theory of change part of that, I think, is the part that resonates most with me, because, and I think mission measurement probably is its own conversation, and there's a lot to unpack there. But I think everyone should have a theory of change, right? Like, you can, how you measure your mission, I think, can vary depending on where you are and what stage you are, and but there should at least be an understanding of like what we're trying to do, and some understanding of whether we're being successful at that or not. And again, I think we can look at it in different ways, but it is true that I think you and I both see lots of organizations that don't have that. They don't have the theory of change. It's a collection of actions that are arguably good, right? And presumably have some level of impact. But to your point, they're not making a strong case for what that impact is, and they're not making a strong case for why I should give to you versus all the other things that I could be giving to that may also be making impact. So we're not even talking about, I'm going to throw up my hands and go buy myself a new bag, or season tickets to the Giants or whatever, but like, where is our institutions the place that I want to invest in, or are there other ways that I really want to make change, and are there better ways to make change? So I think I agree with you. I think it's a good question that you've posed and put out there. And I'm glad I got to hear your rant for the first time live on our podcast.
Well, and just to, as we wrap up, I would just say, I think this is we're heading into our busiest time of year from a fundraising perspective. I think we always kind of say, whenever we talk about end of year fundraising, we kind of always are coming at it from a stewardship first perspective. There's so much solicitation that's happening in the next 2 to 3 months. What's your stewardship message? What's your impact message out to the world? I think you're going to get a lot further along if that's your message. Then, and I know, I don't know how many people will watch this who are doing Thanksgiving cards, because I know in the last 10 years that's become a very popular thing to do. Don't send out a Thanksgiving card that just says, "We're so thankful for you." Like, say that, you can say that, but then say, "We're so thankful for you because your support is allowing us to accomplish," and give some examples, right? Talk about what, but I get plenty of Thanksgiving cards every year that just say, "We're so grateful and thankful for you." And I think, I didn't need this. And that goes right into the recycling and
yeah.
So that's my rant. Any other final thoughts from you, Bob?
No, I mean, I echo everything you said. I think this is a great time to do stewardship before you do a solicitation, just to remind people of whatever they did last year. What impact did it have? And again, we're not, just to be clear, we're not saying that, this is collective, right? Like, you're, as a donor, you've played some role, right? And the organization has played some role, and the community's played some role. So we're not saying that, that the donor is the only person that's having some impact, but the donor had some impact, right? Like, we asked them for money and we said something will be different. You're going to be part of something, this larger impact. And so let them know what that is, and let them know, doing that now before you solicit, I think is super effective. And I would echo too what you said about, like, there's not a lot of point in, you can be grateful, but that should be 10% of stewardship, and 90% of stewardship should be reporting on impact. So yeah, I think this was a good conversation. I look forward to, I think there's a lot to unpack. And so we have, maybe our next few conversations in the hopper already.
Absolutely. Well, best of luck to everyone in their stewardship endeavors in the coming months. And always feel free to reach out to Bob and I if you're interested in engaging in this conversation, or if you have any questions about how we can be helpful in implementing your stewardship program or anything else that's going on in your organization. And with that, we'll sign off and say thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.